Welcome back to another video. It's your boy Quitty, man. We're ready to get right back into this one. Here we go. This is how the first Shadow made so many Stranger Things plot holes. We're gonna see what they talking about. I'm guessing they're talking about how the episode made so much stuff earlier on in the show make sense, and like you could connect it. Let's see what's happening.
Welcome back! Today we are going to be talking about the biggest problems with Stranger Things The First Shadow stage play, and every way that it messes up lore from the show, because while they worked really hard to develop this prequel story to intertwine directly with Season 5 before it comes out, there are still some major inconsistencies between the two. While some are much smaller differences, like Henry's age, how he's in high school with Hopper and Joyce, there's also some much larger things that conflict with what we learned about the Mind Flayer in the actual show. So we're going to talk about all of these today, and all of the others I could find and that I've seen others mention, so make sure you watch until the very end of the video since this play is 100% canon. Yup, the Duffer Brothers themselves aided in its creation, giving them the story elements for the play that intertwine with Season 5 directly. Plus, there's one massive problem that we're going to talk about last that breaks the entire show that I need your opinion on. Now, after watching the play, the first thought that I and a lot of others had was for how much essential lore they just established, it is crazy that they didn't professionally film this, just like the trailer, and release it on Netflix for everyone to watch that wasn't able to physically fly across the world and spend hundreds of dollars on seeing it. Don't get me wrong, the play is amazing, highly recommend, specifically the West End version, but there's no reason to put so much of the story behind a paywall that 99% of fans don't have access to. And keep in mind, the play started over 2 years ago now. It would totally be reasonable for them to put it on Netflix before Season 5. If anything, it would drum up even more excitement for the final season and for the actual play itself. The coolest thing that happened 2 days ago is during the Season 5 press tour in New York, Jamie Campbell Bower, the actor that is Vecna/Henry Creel, just made his Broadway debut by stepping in and being Henry Creel for the very final scene of the play. It skips forward in time a couple years to after all the MK Ultra test subjects were born, and Henry is a little bit older as Brenner is asking him to be an orderly. And Jamie Campbell Bower comes out and the crowd just goes crazy. It's so cool that they did this, but this cements the play even more so as canon, so we really need to talk about everything that is changing. Starting off, the biggest complaint I see is the age difference. In Season 4, when Robin and Nancy are looking through the newspapers at the library, they come across one where we can see that it lists Henry Creel as only being 12 years old when he killed his family. And the play takes place before the Creel murders, and shows Henry in high school along with Joyce, Hopper, Bob Newby, even Mike's parents, which is its own problem they retcon that we'll get to in a second, but how is Henry in high school at 12 years old? Well, there's multiple different what ifs. It seems like they just bent the lore a little bit so that they could put Henry in high school with all the parents of the show so everyone cared more about the play and we could see all the younger versions of these characters. Ninth graders are usually 14 years old, so maybe they just said, no one will notice. If he actually was 12 in high school, it's possible that he was homeschooled or was smart enough to skip a grade, making him only 13 going into high school. There's also the cutoff date, but that doesn't apply since he has a March birthday now. I think instead what happened, why this doesn't add up, is because in the newspaper from Season 4, if you look closely, it also says that Alice Creel is supposed to be 15 years old in the flashbacks, making her Henry's older sister by 3 years. I am almost positive that the Duffer Brothers meant for Alice to be his younger sister, not older. She has never once struck me as being older than Henry. I think it's more likely that the ages were just accidentally swapped by the person that made this article to put in the show. It seems like Henry is supposed to be 15 in the flashbacks and Alice 12. And the real actors' ages agree with this. The actress that plays Alice, Livy Birch, was 12 years old when they filmed these scenes, and the boy, Raphael, was 15 years old when they filmed. I think they just messed up the article. But what if the actual article in the show, The Weekly Watcher, was who messed up? Because that would almost be perfect. They kind of cover crazy stories anyways. It's okay if they mess up an age. That would mean saying that Henry is actually 15 years old in the play in high school. This is honestly what they should have done, but instead they doubled down and confirmed Henry was 12. In the teacher's resource educational pack for the play, they announced for the first time that Henry's birthday is on March 22nd, the same day as Will's birthday. Now, they mention his birthday party in 1955 where the play says he turned 8 years old. If Henry was 8 in 1955 and was born in 47, that means he is actually 12 years old in 1959 when he kills his family and when he was in 9th grade. If he was 2 full years behind in school all his life, no wonder he got bullied in Nevada. That's kind of his parents' fault. I can't believe they doubled down on him being 12 years old in high school instead of saying the crazy newspaper got it wrong in universe. So no, he's actually 12 in high school, and yeah, it doesn't make sense. It could have, but it doesn't. And like we mentioned a second ago, Mike's parents are both seniors in high school at the same time. Did nobody watch season 1?
My mom was young. My dad was older.
This implies that her parents are far enough apart where it's worth mentioning. It doesn't mean that they're in the same grade. And if we look at the actors that play Ted and Karen Wheeler, they are 8 years apart. This is most realistically what the Duffers actually wanted their age gap to be. But since there was an opportunity to put all the parents in school for the stage play, they went ahead and either ignored or retconned this detail in the show. The most of their ages could be apart is like a year or two max, which is normal for relationships. It would be weird, I guess, if Ted was a senior and Karen was just starting 4th grade. This is, like I said, somewhat of a minor continuity error that doesn't matter too much in the grand scheme of things as long as you're okay with ignoring it next time you watch this scene. But to me, honestly, one of the biggest things that changes what the show established is how close Joyce and Hopper are in the stage play to all of the paranormal happenings. I mean, constantly, throughout the play, Joyce and Hopper are firsthand around a lot of flickering lights, which they realize with radio static have a direct correlation to the mystery killings. And that's entirely what season 1 is comprised of, just flickering lights mixed with a bunch of mystery deaths around town. And just 20 years ago, Hopper was right there investigating the exact same thing on his own. He is the one, along with Bob, that learned the radio static is linked to the killings. And he actually presses Henry at school if he did the killings, and Henry gets scared and the lights start flickering and they explode. And Hopper sees this thing happen more than once. It's just so crazy knowing all of this that Hopper has the audacity to not believe Joyce immediately when she tells him about the flickering lights and the static over her phone line. It was only 20 years ago. The town went under curfew. Everybody's pets were being murdered with their eyes being gouged out. Hopper is the first one that ever noticed the gouged out eyes, which also means that both him and Joyce, once they get back from Russia after season 4, should have immediately said something to the kids. At the very least that they went to high school with Henry Creel. I mean, when they get around to dealing with how to save Henry from the mind flare in season 5 by finding something he loves, they better pipe up quickly and let the kids know about Patty Newby. Because Joyce is the first one that saw Patty and Henry's chemistry, and is basically the reason they got together so fast. She pushed them together. Another thing, back to Hopper not believing Joyce not making sense anymore, he also comments in season 1 how nothing ever special has happened in Hawkins. He didn't believe that someone took Will because nothing like that ever happens here. And he even doubles down and says that the biggest thing that's ever happened in Hawkins is when a bird mistook Eleanor Gillespie's hair for a nest.
This is Hawkins, okay? You wanna know the worst thing that's ever happened here? It was when an owl attacked Eleanor Gillespie's head because it thought that her hair was a nest.
Okay, fine.
And now that the Creel murders have been revealed, the entire claim just doesn't make any sense, especially for only 20 years passing since it happened. That's not something a town will ever live down, especially in that amount of time. I mean, even season 4 disproved this by showing us the big city newspaper from Indianapolis covering the incident. But the play itself's story was basically a serial killer going around town killing everyone's pets. But like I was saying, the newspapers in season 4 leads us to a couple more inconsistencies. These are much smaller than the next ones, but I still wanted to mention them. Originally, in the newspapers, they dated the Creel murders as happening on March 1959. It wasn't ever relevant to the story yet, but that's when they temporarily established them taking place. And then, in the play, they completely changed the dates. The start of the play, in current 1959, starts on October 1st, and then a week and a half takes place in Act 1. Henry almost kills Patty's father in the Creel house. Joyce, Bob, and Hopper rush in and find Bob's dad bleeding out on the ground with his eyes gouged out. I mean, just another instance of why they would never forget anything like this. But right before intermission, they play a montage of newspapers and police reports summing up the incident, and that's when we lose track of time. But I think it's on purpose, because they just revealed in season 5 that the play and the Creel Creel murders now happen on November 6th, 1959, which coincidentally is the same day that Will goes missing. Another thing changed from the show, but I'm sure they will make it worth it with a big reveal. Another slight newspaper inconsistency is originally it was said that Henry murdered his family Saturday night, and it wasn't until the next day, Sunday morning, that the police show up and discover the bodies. But in the play, since Hopper, Bob, and Joyce are investigating the murders, they've come to the conclusion that Henry's father Victor Creel was behind the killings. They devise a plan on the night of the play to capture him and trick him into confessing to the murders, interrogating him when he takes the bag off of his head. This was Ted Wheeler's fault, by the way. Ted accidentally brought Lonnie backstage instead of Victor, but when Hopper realizes Victor is missing, he rushes off, seemingly to the Creel house, where he meets his father, the chief of police, who is already on site, and so is Brenner too. Everybody finds the murders in this new altered version almost immediately, within the hour instead of the next day. But like I said, honestly, the newspaper information being changed is much easier to ignore than actual things spoken about and referenced in the show, so I don't mind these two changes as much. Another massive thing they change is the Mind Flayer and Henry's relationship. This is huge. It's the end of the biggest season yet, and Henry Creel, well, Vecna, is monologuing to Eleven, and more importantly, to the audience. It's the Duffer's way of informing the viewers on key story elements. Vecna tells Eleven that when she banished him, he found the Mind Flayer and molded it into the shape of a spider, implying that he was in control of it, and that he had been using it for the entire show to do his bidding, to infect Will, to build the meat puppet, to control the Demogorgons, everything. Originally, we thought the Mind Flayer was the villain when it was introduced in season 2, and now the big reveal is that it was Vecna all along. But throughout the entirety of the first Shadow stage play, we see Henry Creel, the boy, was a victim. We learn that before he moved to Hawkins, he stumbled on some Mind Flayer particles that a Russian doctor stole from a military research base that Brenner was working on. And these Mind Flayer particles infect Henry and transport him to Dimension X. And ever since, throughout the rest of the play, the Mind Flayer uses Henry as a host. It lets him use some of its powers in exchange for staying in his body, and it eventually takes over Henry. That's when the Vecna voice comes out, implying that Vecna is the Mind Flayer through Henry's body. But Henry is very much still in control for a lot of the story, and there's moments where Henry is actively fighting the Mind Flayer to save people that it's trying to kill, and he actually defeats the Mind Flayer at one point in his mind. But by the end of the play, it takes back over, and that's when the Creel murders happen. The play shows us that the Mind Flayer is the actual villain, and hints at Henry's possible redemption, that the young boy, Henry Creel, before he was turned to the dark side, into Vecna, he might still be somewhere inside of him, and this is 100% different from season 4. And when they were asked about this, they simply told us in season 4 that Henry is an unreliable narrator, which honestly feels a bit like a cop-out answer. Henry monologuing is your voice to tell us the story, so if you're going to double down, you're just telling us you lied to us and that we can't trust what you tell us. That is, unless they're trying to say that it wasn't Henry, but the Mind Flayer was monologuing and it was spinning reality to confuse Eleven into thinking that Henry was still in control for some reason, as if it was a threat to the Mind Flayer. But this just muddles everything up and we have to try so hard to make sense of it. I love the play, but the plot definitely contradicts the show a tad, and then they gave kind of a meh response when asked about it. Now, the last problem I have with it is all of the inconsistencies between the two different versions of the same play, between Broadway and the West End. It's cool that as it was coming out, they were working on season 5, and they changed things in the play to work with a show. When Broadway started doing shows, a year and a half later, they changed so many big story elements, and since it would be too hard to change all of those in the existing West End version, it just stayed the same. So depending today on where you see it, the story will be drastically different. The first person that started all of this was Dr. Brenner's father. He was captain of the ship that went missing in 1943. It was the first encounter with Dimension X, and he was the sole survivor. He was the first host of the Mind Flayer. They never mention him having any powers once coming back, which is weird, but in London, he died when Brenner was young, and that's what inspires him to dedicate his entire life to studying the particles in Dimension X. But on Broadway, he's still alive in 1959. They wheel him out on stage looking like Terry Ives, and then he speaks for the first time to Henry, telling him he's his friend. This is another instance of the Mind Flayer activating the host when it needs needs them. It's hard to tell what happens, but it seems like when Henry and Brenner's father touch, all the lights go crazy and the particles go from Brenner's father into Henry. But earlier in the play, Brenner tells Henry they extracted the exotic material from his father, and that's what was in the box Henry found in the caves. As if they exorcised the particles out of him, but here they are again still in him, like they only got half of them out, but they're already in Henry too. It's just so confusing, and after everything calms down, Brenner's father is dead, and Brenner could care less. Oh yeah, and then on Broadway, Henry opens up the first portal to the Upside Down. A Demogorgon reaches through and throws Brenner to the side before it closes. Originally, in the West End, they hook up the brain monitoring device to Henry and bring out the spyglass that he dropped near the caves, and this pushes him past the trauma block, and Brenner sees images on the TV of Henry's memories that day, of him being transported to Dimension X and seeing a Demogorgon. And this alone is enough of a breadcrumb to fuel Brenner's excitement for the next 10 years of research before he eventually gets 11 to open the first portal. It seems like they kind of changed it for shock value and to put another cool moment in the play. It kind of undermines how special 11 opening the gate on accident was. I don't think it's needed, but it's probably more canon than the UK version just because they made it more recently. The last biggest confusing point for me is how on earth were the mind flare particles alive when there was no actively opened gate? In the show, they established that if they close the gate, they sever the connection to the mind flare. The particles are useless without it. They're pretty clear about that. But now in the show, the mind flare particles are active throughout the entire thing. They're constantly taking over Henry Creel and killing animals and trying to kill Mr. Newby. Even in the caves when Henry first found them, how are they active? When they wheel out Brenner's father and it speaks through him, how are those active? What about when they transfer into Henry? I know he opens a temporary gate on Broadway, but it immediately closes. Yet by the time the Creel murders happen, the connection is fully complete. I'm not sure how you explain this after they establish the rules in the show of needing an open gate for the connection. I think they're just going to have to try to explain the bare minimum in another monologue scene through Henry's memories. I just imagine that they don't have much time to explain everything. It's going to be so condensed. My biggest complaint is just that they never put the play on Netflix and made it accessible for all the fans to watch. If you have any more questions about plot holes and inconsistencies, put them down in the comments and I'll try to answer them best I can if I missed any.
Alright. Thank y'all for watching. We're gonna get out of here. Appreciate y'all.